birth of America gave rise to a new and revolutionary idea that a man, no matter his social class, could determine his future, make his fortune, and build a new life. The opening up of the West encouraged the belief that every man controlled his own destiny. Millions of dollars were made on the whims of chance, whether they were gamblers or miners, peddlers or farmers. Some of those fortunes became forgotten after their owners died in obscurity, never leaving a will. Of all the stories of money won and then forgotten, one stands apart from the rest. In the San Francisco vaults of Wells Fargo Bank lies what is purportedly the largest unclaimed stock certificate in the world. Its worth is estimated at $3.2 million. Who stands to inherit this fortune? San Francisco marks the start of the search for the heir to the $3.2 million. A great number of domestic as well as overseas financial institutions have chosen to place their headquarters here. Fortunes are spent sorting the thousands of documents that detail financial exchanges generated here. It was in the process of examining some of these records and setting up new files that Wells Fargo Bank accidentally discovered Stock Certificate 390.
The certificate epitomizes the $20 billion unclaimed in the United States today. Everyone watching this program might have had an aunt, uncle, or perhaps a great-great-grandparent who left money in an account, property, or stock that is forgotten. How would you like to inherit the $3.2 million in the Texas Pacific Land Certificate? In search of, set out to find the rightful heir. We began making a checklist of the leads that we had. First, we knew that Texas Pacific Land Trust Company had issued the certificate in 1888. Second, we knew that a New York lending firm, Blake Brothers, was involved. Third, the name Delamar was associated with the stock. How or why, we weren't sure.
The first name on the list of leads we had gathered from San Francisco research was Texas Pacific Land Trust. We traveled to Dallas, home of that corporation, in hope of learning more about the certificate. The vice president of the trust, Jim McCall, gave us our first solid bits of information.
Certificate 390 was one of the original certificates issued by the trust. It comprised 100 shares.
The certificate had originally been issued for shares of stock in T&P Railroad, which subsequently became Texas Pacific. The shares of stock represented parcels of land the railroad had received from the state of Texas in return for building a rail line from Texarkana to El Paso. Texas Pacific stock had split numerous times, and coupled with the trust's association with Texaco Oil, every original company share became worth incredible sums. Certificate 390 had become increasingly valuable because on much of the cattle grazing land it represented, oil had been discovered.
In 1954, the trust ran ads all over the country trying to find the unknown heir. I have this set of files here which represents correspondence, claimants, letters we have received from various people who think they may own it.
Texas Pacific found no one who could prove ownership. They did have records, however, that the New York lending firm, Blake Brothers, had originally purchased Certificate 390 and 4 others in 1888. All the certificates except 390 were recorded as being sold to other individuals. Only 390 had been lost. Some theorize that the mistake occurred because business records were not carefully kept before 1924, when the Securities and Exchange Commission demanded otherwise. There were other reports that possibly the certificate and any record of it were destroyed in a fire at Blake Brothers in the 1920s. The next stop, obviously, was New York and Blake Brothers. While checking business records in New York City, we discovered that the old Blake Brothers had liquidated all of their assets sometime in the mid-1950s and no longer existed. There was even an indication that Blake Brothers had begun an investigation into the whereabouts of Certificate 390. An attorney who represented Texas Pacific, Frederick Shea, explains.
They began a thorough search among their records and so forth to ascertain anything they could about why this certificate had originally been registered in their name and what had happened to it. And it turned out eventually that they couldn't find anything on it. So they came to the conclusion that since no one had claimed ownership of this certificate, which was then worth about $2 million, over all these years, and it was registered in their name, and there was no contrary evidence that they were entitled to it.
In 1952, Blake Brothers instituted a lawsuit in the New York Supreme Court, here recreated, to prove that they and they alone owned the certificate. Their case was consistently hindered by incomplete or inaccurate records. The case reached the turning point when their star witness, under oath, and who had been with the company since the late 1890s, could not remember details of transactions involving the certificate or of Texas Pacific Land Trust. It seemed that Blake Brothers could not prove ownership either. Then who was the real owner of the certificate? That left only one more lead on our checklist. The name Delamar. New York's public library houses one of the best genealogical sections in the world. Nearly any name can be traced here. Delamar was an unusual name, so we were hopeful of finding at least some information. Searcher Barbara Wager found something. There was a Delamar, a Captain Joseph Raphael Delamar, a prominent and wealthy New York citizen at the turn of the century who had emigrated from Holland. In the New York Times, we learned that upon his death in 1918, he had bequeathed great sums to medical schools, nieces and nephews, and to his only child, Alice. In that year, Alice Delamar was still in her late teens, which meant that she could still be alive today to claim her fortune.